Hi, welcome back, and welcome to the HTML CSS video on images. In this lesson, we'll be talking about writing local paths that take a user into a folder. We'll use the image element and source attribute to add a picture to a web page. We'll style an image element with borders and floats, and we'll add background images to HTML elements. So first off, when we talk about images in a web page, they get added using the img tag. You can see an example of the img tag here on the right. The img tag is a singleton, just like the br tag, and has an attribute that we need to use called source, src. Source points to the file to be shown. If that file is in our system, then we can use relative paths. If it's out on the web, then we have to start with http:// and use the entire address. There's also an optional attribute called alt that can be used to describe the picture in case the image load fails or for users that are using screen readers. So let's go back and let's just take a second and take a look at this here. Let me pull up some things. First, you'll see that I have a folder called practice, and here's the HTML file that I'm working on, and here's the image that I'm working with, HTML CSS logo. So we're going to come into the body, and we're going to enter an img tag, an image tag, and we're going to use the source attribute, and the source is html css underscore logo dot png. And again, it's a singleton tag. So when I save this and refresh it over here, we now see that picture. That picture is way too big. So we can throw some styles on it. And we'll just give it a width of 200 pixels for now. And there's that image with a width of 200 pixels. Notice that by doing a width of 200 pixels, we automatically get a proportioned height as well. We'll come back to styles in just a few minutes. What I want to talk about first is the location of images. I think that's a really important thing for us to discuss. So if we look at this folder again, you'll see that the file, the HTML file, and the image are in the same spot. That's paramount right now. In a later lesson, when we talk about links, we'll talk about different ways to get different places. But the one thing you might want to do right now is you might want to make an images folder so that all of your images are in the same area. And it just kind of gives us less files to look at. So I'm going to call this images. And I'm going to drag that logo file into here. So now I've got practice in my main folder and then my images inside of my images folder. When we come back and look at the code now and look at the page, if I refresh the page, the image isn't going to be found. If I come in here and give an alt that says logo, and it'll say that when it's not found, or again, if you have a screen reader, it'll say what's going on for anybody with a screen reader that can't see what the image is. And the reason it can't be found is because it's no longer on the same level. So to get into that images level, I have to do images slash. And at that point, when I refresh, now it's going to work. So it's really important that you understand where your images are in relation to your HTML files. If they're in the same folder, sharing a space like they were originally, you just write the image name. If they're in different places, it becomes a little more difficult, but at least now you can put all your images into a singular folder, and that should help you greatly as you proceed forward. All right, back to the presentation here. The next thing we're going to talk about is image formatting. So when we do width and height, and you just saw me do a little bit of that, we can do it in pixels or percent. If I set only the width or only the height, then it will change the other proportionally. If I set them both, then I can distort the image. There's also a border style that I can do, and the border style takes three pieces of information. That is the pixel width of it, the style, and the color. Um, Styles include solid, single, double, dotted, dashed, inset, outset, ridge, groove, and color can either be a reserved color or a hex color. And finally, we're going to show you some border radius. It rounds the corners of an image. It can be set in pixels or in percent. If set high enough, it converts the image into a circle. Let's see some example of that code down below at the bottom of how that's all tied together. But we're going to go now into our example and we're going to take a look at it. So here's the code and here's the image. So now we're going to just start styling. So if I come in here and I set the height to be 50 pixels, then you'll see that it distorts the image. If I make it a square image, which it wasn't originally, I can make it look like that. Then I'm going to give it a border. And for the border, I'm going to say 5 pixel width, and I'm going to set it to be solid, and I'm going to make it be green. So that's what my border looks like. Some other options, we said we can do double, or we can do inset. See the slight change in colors there. I can do, let's see, I can do dotted, do dash. So any of those border options work. And again, instead of just using green, I can use a hex color. Let's do red, which is FF0000. And that gives me dotted red. Let me take it back to solid now. And we're going to look at the last property we're talking about today, which is border radius. And if I just make this small, if I just make it a 5 pixel border radius, see it just gets a little bit rounded. If I take it up to say 15, now you can really start to see it round out. Now if I go all the way up to 100, then it turns my image into a circle. So I can take this border, I can make it 10 pixel border, I can make it black, solid. And now because it's a little bigger, I need to make this a little bigger to get my full circle. Or I can take that border away and it'll just give me a circular piece of the image. Doesn't look quite as good without the border there. Border might be a little too thick. Let's drop it back to 5 pixels. Now we've got a nice circular image from what was originally rectangular. Interesting thing, this width, height, border, and border radius not only works on images, it also works on divs or any um, block level element for that matter. Images are a little special because they're not a block level element, but I can do the same thing here. I can style this div to have a background color of blue, and I can give it a width of 100 pixels and a height of 100 pixels and a border of 2 pixels, double and yellow, and a border radius of 50 pixels. And we get that nice little blue circle there with a yellow, double yellow border radius. So really some interesting styles that we can utilize there to get things to work for us. And again, here's all of that information. Um, and dotted, single, double, dotted, dashed, inset, outset, ridge, and groove. Okay. Again, these can also all be done in percents. If I set a width to 50%, it will be 50% of the screen. All right. So there's plenty of things that we can work on there for image formatting. Now, when we put images with text, the HTML, as you see here, will align itself to the bottom and then continue after, leaving us with all this mostly undesirable white space. If we take the image and we float it to the left or right, that will allow the text to wrap around it like is happening here. The trick is that to make this work, the image has to come before the text in the code. And I'll show you what we mean by that. We'll come back into our code here again. Let me get rid of this second div that I wrote. And I'm just going to write some text. This is sample text. And I'll copy and paste that a bunch of times. And you'll see how it pushes itself down to the bottom of the image and continues after that. If I come up here into the styles and I add float left, now you'll see that I've got the information, the text floating to the on the right because the image is floating to the left. Of course, if I take this and I float it to the right, then it goes to the other side. There's no such thing as floating center, so that's not really an option. But I can float left and float right. However, that said, if I take this same code and switch the order of it so that the image appears after the text, but it doesn't do what I wanted it to do. See, what has to happen is I have to place the image where it's going to be, and then floating it moves it over and allows the other information to slide up. And that's what we need to happen here. Now I'm going to put a little bit less text here, and I'm going to write another div. This time I'm just going to give the div a background. I'm going to give the div a background color of red. I'm just going to write hello in here. And what I want you to see is that it also falls into that float. So it's still wrapping. So there is a way that when I want that wrap to stop, I can. So if I come down to this div and I apply a style called clear both, then you'll see the text up here will still wrap, but starting with the div, writing clear both stops any floating. So from that div down, any text that I write, this text will not wrap because in that div, I used a clear both and that stops any of the floating. Okay. So back to the presentation here. Right, that's my images. That's are floating. The next thing then is to talk about background images. I don't often advise background images unless you've got a really great artistic eye and understand how to set that up because they can be a distraction. But you need, so if you're careful about the images that you're using, then you can do that. So there's several settings we can use. We can just set the background image. We can set the background position. It can be left, right, center, and top, bottom, center. We can set the background size in width and height pixels or in auto cover contain. We can repeat the background and we can make it fixed. There's a great site out here at W3 Schools that talks about the background property. I strongly suggest you come out there and you can use there, try it yourself to do a number of different things. We'll do our own version of that in just a minute. But let's take a look at background images in action. So what I did here was I took a background image called coding.jpg back here, which has words on it. And again, it's a bit of a problem because that's going to be distracting to people trying to read my page, but that's okay. I'm doing background position center center, which means it's center horizontally and center vertically. I'm going to set the background size to cover. And what that'll do is stretch the image to cover the size of my web page. And I'm going to do background repeat, no repeat. Notice that's being put on the body. It can be put also on any kind of div or anything else that you wanted. But I wanted my entire page background page to have this background. So I put it on the body and then I was able to do an H1 inside of it that said programming and you can see the programming come across. So if we come over to the code that we were working on before, and this is going to be a good example of what not to do when you're doing a background image. I'll come to this body and I'm going to set up my style on it, and I'll do background image, and I'll set that to URL, and I will use the same thing I had before, which is images slash HTML CSS logo .png. And we're going to also then do the same thing. We're going to go background. Actually, let's just leave it at this. Let's leave it as it is for now, and you'll see what happens if I just set a background image. Oh, style equals. I got to spell out image. Sorry. There we go. All right, so I've got that. I'm going to make it big, and you're going to see that it's taking up the whole space and actually continuing on. It's very difficult to see. It makes things bad. With a smaller image, you'll see that it tiles itself all the way across, which is also often undesirable. So we want to do some things to help that. And again, that's going to come through in some of these other styles that we're going to apply. We do background position, center, and then we're going to do background size, and we're going to set that to cover, and that's really going to be the big one for us. So you'll see now, that it's starting to tile, and so it made it smaller. And so now we're going to go one more style here, and we're going to say background repeat, no repeat. And then it stretches to be the size that you want it to be based on whatever your web page is and looks like. Okay. So that's kind of the basics of images. We'll just come back in here to wrap everything up now. So we've got a review here where the only tag that we learned was the image tag, but we learned a bunch of styles. So we did width, height, border, and border radius, which all work on images and block level elements like a div. So does float. And then I did all the background properties, image, position, size, attachment, and repeat. And we use those to put backgrounds either on the page or on a div or some kind of block level element. So we've got all that going for us. Asking you now to do a practice. You're going to get a copy of Dolly's Persistence of Memory. Just go search it on the internet. Place a frame around it that is inset 6 pixels in blue, and then float the image to the right and add this very same text. So take a second and work that out. Okay, let's see the answer. You'll see here that we've got the image set up. I put the file inside of my images folder. So it was dolly.jpg. I set the style to be a width of 150 because I had found a much larger picture. I floated it to the right, and then I set the border to be 6 pixels inset and blue. And then here's the text, remembering that the text has to come after the image if we want the image to work properly. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time when we talk about the semantic elements in lecture 4.